The following program is brought to you in part by the film Backdoor Channels, The Price of Peace.
Welcome to another Leon Charney Report. We have a really eclectic and exciting show tonight.
My name is Tadmor. I'm CEO of Bet Atfutzot, the Museum of the Jewish People in Tel Aviv. Well, it's actually more than a museum. Bet Atfutzot, the Museum of the Jewish People, is an institution that deals with Jewish identity. Our mission is to strengthen the sense of belonging through engagement in Jewish identity. Specifically, a very pluralistic, inclusive brand of Jewish identity. In our view, we're a big extended family. We believe in Jewish peoplehood. We believe that we share a lot of common experiences, common history, common heritage, a common language, whether we speak it or not, a common ancestral homeland, whether we reside in it or not, common values. All of these things make us into a people or an extended family, which in the specific case of Bet Atfutzot, we see it as an open, pluralistic, and diverse family. Well, it used to be called the Diaspora Museum because literally the meaning of Bet Atfutzot is the house of the diaspora. And when it opened in 1978, part of its mission was to portray the rich array of life in the Jewish diaspora. However, we're in the midst of a multi-year grand renewal process, which I will speak about hopefully in a few minutes. And in that process, we're not only redoing the museum and other parts, we're also refreshing our narrative. This time around, we're not going to be putting an emphasis on the line that separates Israel and the diaspora. We feel this is an outdated conversation. We think we should be stressing the things that bring us together and the common denominator or denominators between Jews all over the world, and not delineating the difference between Jews who live in Israel and abroad. I would also add that in the almost 40 years since Bet Atfutzot was opened, different forms of behavior have emerged. We have lots of people who reside both in Israel and America. We've got Israelis who are relocating to America for various lengths of time. We've got Americans with a dual home in Israel. We've got so many Americans with children or grandchildren in Israel and vice versa. Travel has become much more popular. So the old ways of defining either you reside in Israel or you don't they're not so relevant to modern society. And in any case, we've taken diaspora out of our conversation. We will remain Bet Atfutzot for lots of reasons, historical, even legal reasons. The law that ensures the existence of Bet Atfutzot is called the Bet Atfutzot law, passed by the Knesset about 10 years ago. But we now use the name the Museum of the Jewish People. Look, first of all, Bet Atfutzot is a mouthful for Americans. And so even technically or phonetically, it's a complicated name. One of the things that we stress this time around is that the 4,000-year history of the Jewish people, which, yes, has been full of calamities and survival and persecution, has also been full of flourishing and thriving, influencing, achieving. Had it only been persecution, we wouldn't be here. And we wouldn't be 14 million strong with two very, very robust Jewish communities in Israel and America. And so I think more than just surviving, the Jewish people have proved through these years that we succeed and thrive and flourish. And when we redo Bet Atfutzot, and I'll speak about that in a minute, we're putting the emphasis on optimism. Lo amut ki echyeh, lashana haba b'Yerushalayim, the covenant. These are all things that we believe have actually led to the survival of the Jewish people. We're an optimistic people. And we're a people who constantly strive for betterment and for achievement. And when you look at Jewish history, I think we can be proud of the great contribution of the Jewish people to the world at large. And so our message puts, with all due respect to Yad Vashem, is a singular, hugely important institution. The Holocaust is an unprecedented and hopefully never to be repeated singular event in humanity, the greatest calamity ever. However, it is not the totality of the Jewish experience. The Museum of the Jewish People that we're now building in Tel Aviv tells the story in its entirety. It's the only Jewish museum in the world that tells the entire story. There are a lot of Jewish, in any city or town you will find a Jewish museum, and that's great. And usually those museums will tell the story of that specific city, town, or country. In the United States, there's a wonderful Jewish museum in Philadelphia. There's several museums in other cities. And it's usually through a vertical. The vertical is usually a geographical vertical. Sometimes it's a denominational vertical. Sometimes it's a thematic vertical. There's a Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. Again, that's the theme. Strangely enough, there's not one single Jewish museum that tells the story in its entirety. And we are that museum. And so maybe now is a good place to talk about what Bet Atfutzot does. Again, the museum being just one part of what we're active in. First of all, we're very lucky that it was established in Tel Aviv, because Tel Aviv, Jerusalem has an abundance of historical landmarks. Tel Aviv is a great city, but it's not abundant in historical landmarks. So it's a good thing that it's in Tel Aviv. Historically, one of the founding partners in Bet Atfutzot and one of our shareholders is the Tel Aviv University. And our building resides on the Tel Aviv University campus. By the way, the other owners or shareholders are the State of Israel, the Jewish Agency, and the World Jewish Congress. Needless to say, we're a not-for-profit institution. And so I think some would say that we're a little bit of Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, in the sense that you usually don't find historical landmark institutions such as ours in Tel Aviv. So that's the reason, and we're not moving anytime soon. We've got a wonderful site, and now that we're redoing it, we are redoing it on the same site, within the same wonderful building that we moved into in 1978 when we opened. And so I began to say, Bet Atfutzot is more than just a museum. So yes, one of the things we do is exhibition. And so we're home to a very large permanent or core exhibition. And we also do special exhibitions on varying subjects. Currently in Bet Atfutzot there's an art exhibition and a Judaica exhibition. We just closed an exhibition about Amy Winehouse, the deceased Jewish singer. We had a wonderful exhibition that we did on Jewish fashion designers, which traced the very interesting route of the age-old Jewish art of tailoring, which, it's funny, almost anybody you talk to will tell you, my grandfather, my grandmother, somebody was a tailor. It's a very Jewish art. It begins with what is called isur shatnez. There's a halachic reason for Jews to sew their own clothes, because there are rules and regulations, okay? But it's always been a very, very Jewish profession. And then it traces the route from there up to today's top fashion designers. And we were very lucky to have the cooperation of some of the world's leading Jewish designers who all sent us iconic gowns that they designed. Ralph Lauren, Donna Karan, Marc Jacobs, Michael Kors, Sonia Riccio, Diane von Furstenberg. I could go on, but all of these collaborated with us and sent us an iconic dress. We combined that with some dresses designed by prominent Israeli designers. And so we told a historical tale of how the Great Migration, Jews coming in from Eastern Europe, mainly to New York, the garment industry, beginning with the sweatshops, the garment district, which was always the Shmada district, the Shmada industry. It's got a Yiddish name because it's always been a very Jewish industry. Up to today's generation of top fashion designers. Now you may ask, what is this doing in the Museum of the Jewish People? And my answer would be, and it's the same answer. You could ask, what's Amy Winehouse? What's Jewish about Amy Winehouse? And I would say that creativity is one of the defining features of Jewish culture. From the moment that the Enlightenment and emancipation, that the Jewish mind met the open society and open world, that created a fusion of great creativity. And it's become, look at any creative field and you would find a disproportionate amount of Jews. There's a reason for that, and that is that we, through socialization, we've become a very, very creative people. And it's one of the ways in which we contribute to the world. As I mentioned before, Leon, exhibition is one thing we do, so we're a museum. The other two things that we do is that we're a place of education. Our educational arm is called the International School for Jewish Peoplehood Studies, which is a long name for a group of people that develops and implements educational programs for groups that come to Bet Atfutzot, and also for actually wherever Jewish identity is taught around the world. We've got schools and Jewish community centers and synagogues in places as far away as Casablanca, Morocco, San Jose, Costa Rica, Athens, Greece, and not to mention the United States and the rest of Europe, which are conducting programs that have been developed at Bet Atfutzot and implemented by Bet Atfutzot. So that's the second thing we do is education. And the third thing we do is that Bet Atfutzot is home to 5 extensive databases. The most famous one is the genealogy database. Genealogy, tracing your family roots. You can come to Bet Atfutzot, and if you're lucky, you will find a family tree that's been submitted to us by a distant relative. However, the genealogy database is just one of 5. There's also a huge photo archive with hundreds of thousands of digitized, tagged photographs. There's a music database, thousands of pieces of Jewish music. There's a community database chronicling over 3,500 existing and no longer existing Jewish communities. And there's a family name database. Family name being different than family tree. Family name will tell you the meaning of your family name, where it's derived from, etc. Now, as I said, we're in the midst of a grand renewal program that was begun in 2006 and will end at the end of 2018, which involves all the 3 things that we do at Bet Atfutzot. So the databases that I just mentioned, the big development is that finally we're taking them to the internet. Up till now, the great Achilles heel was that while they were digitized, you still had to come to Bet Atfutzot in order to access this information. At the end of 2015, we will be launching our database site, which will make all of these accessible on the internet to anyone, anytime, anywhere, at absolutely no cost. This wealth of information, about 6 million entries, is a repository that belongs to the Jewish people, and it's our duty to make it accessible to anybody Jewish or non-Jewish who's interested. And so we're making a huge effort and putting a lot of resources into making these accessible online. The museum, which was opened in 1978, we're redoing that. That's a huge undertaking. Building a museum from scratch, even if the building exists, is a great curatorial and design effort. Beit HaTfutzot has a purpose, and the purpose of Beit HaTfutzot, and maybe this is a place to mention, currently we get about 200,000 visitors a year, which is a substantial number. Getting people into Beit HaTfutzot is not an end in itself. We are a content producer and distributor. We need to get people involved and to strengthen a sense of belonging in people. And we have to be honest and say that the majority of Jewish people around the world will never ever set foot at Beit HaTfutzot. It happens to be a statistical fact. The reason for that is that the majority will never ever set foot in Israel anyway. And so it's our duty to come out and reach out to them. And the way to do that is through technology. The internet is a great blessing. And whereas databases within an intranet inside an institution is wonderful for people who come to that institution, we can get that to several hundred thousands of people. The internet allows us to communicate with millions of people, and that's a huge difference. Well, the relaunch of the museum will happen in 2 stages. Stage 1 is just 9 months away. In May of 2016, we open a new wing, which includes 5 new galleries. I can already say that 4 new exhibitions will open simultaneously on May 23rd, 2016. And that will be phase 1. Phase 2 is the complete overhaul of the permanent exhibition of Beit HaTfutzot, which will happen at the end of 2018. I want to say a couple of words about the galleries that we opened in 9 months, because I think they portray the diversity of content at Beit HaTfutzot. So one of the galleries, anybody who's ever been to Beit HaTfutzot remembers the Synagogue Models. There are miniature models of synagogues at Beit HaTfutzot, about 20 of them, which are very accurate reconstructions of synagogues that either exist or no longer exist, but we have the plans for them. When we decided to redo Beit HaTfutzot, it was clear that we're not giving up the synagogues. They're an artifact in themselves. They're the most memorable thing at Beit HaTfutzot. It was clear that we're staying with them. On the contrary, we took a 6,000 square foot gallery, the biggest gallery that we have, and the synagogues now will reside there with interactive and media and light and sound, and it's going to be a wonderful experience about the way our people have congregated through the ages and across continents. So one gallery, or rather hall, will be the Synagogue Hall. Adjacent to that will be an exhibition marking 30 years to Operation Moses, the Aliyah from Ethiopia. A Beit HaTfutzot photographer joined the people coming from Ethiopia 30 years ago. And we looked at those photographs, and we traced 10 very, very iconic photographs and went back to these people to see what has transpired, what has developed in the last 30 years. Now, as we know, the Aliyah from Ethiopia is not a 100% rosy story. There have been many difficult stories. And quite typically, out of the 10 stories that we portrayed, 3 are uplifting, 3 are distressing, and the other 4 are typical, regular stories. But we made 2 decisions about this exhibition. One, it is done by Ethiopians themselves, the curator and the director of the films. The whole crew is an Ethiopian crew. This is the Ethiopian Aliyah telling their own story the way that they see it, not the way that we see it. Secondly, we decided to go with the stories wherever they lead. And so we're not going to be painting an overly pink and optimistic story. It is what it is. Where the stories led us, that's where we went. And some of them are difficult stories. Not all of it has been a success. Adjacent to that will be an exhibition marking Bob Dylan's 75th birthday. Again, Bob Dylan, an iconic Jewish musician. A lot of his text has to do with his Judaism. He went through many stages. At one point, he was a born-again Christian. Then he went back to Judaism. Has been a devout, well, not devout, but has been unequivocally Jewish for many years. And so we're going to be telling the story of his career with a special emphasis on the Jewish aspects of his music. And then the fourth gallery, and mind you, all of these open simultaneously, will be a children's gallery. And the theme will be Jewish superheroes. Jewish superheroes are not caped crusaders flying through the sky, but rather thinkers, revolutionaries, inventors, scientists, both the typical names that you would expect to find. Yes, you will meet Moses and David Ben Gurion, but also people you would not necessarily expect to find there, or names that are not necessarily household names, but have done significant things and significant contributions to the world. So all of that happens on May 23rd. All of that is just phase one. That will allow us then to shut down the permanent exhibition and work on that for 2 years while never closing Bet Hatfutzot even for 1 minute. And that's the grand plan. Bet Hatfutzot, in terms of brand recognition, to a certain generation, the brand recognition is almost 100%. Because when we opened in 78, we were a must stop for anybody coming to Israel. And so when you talk to anybody of a certain age group, I'd say over 60, Bet Hatfutzot, they know Bet Hatfutzot, they know what we're about. Maybe they haven't visited us in a long time, but they know about us. But since we've been in the process of renewal for a fairly long time, there's a certain age group that's not aware of Bet Hatfutzot, and we need to get to these people. Again, this harks back to what we talked about regarding online. We need to remember, we need to speak to people where they are. This is the age where you reach people where they are. They are in social media, they're on the internet. They are where they are, and it's incumbent on you to get to them. Now, whether that helps or doesn't help to draw them physically into the museum, that's almost besides the point. A modern institution such as ours that has to do with Jewish identity needs to define a target audience and then reach that audience where it is. And so it's for that reason that we put an emphasis on two things besides the physical museum. One is online and other digital initiatives. And the other thing is outreach programs, more educational programs that we export to schools and institutions all over the world. More traveling exhibitions. We did an exhibition 3 years ago on the capture of Adolf Eichmann. It was the first time ever that the Mossad collaborated with the museum, provided us with a curator who was a Mossad employee. And together we did an exhibition at Bet Hatfutzot with actual artifacts from the capture of Eichmann. There's the swiveling license plate, there's the syringe, there's the forged papers, etc., etc. And the booth from the trial, of course. We're preparing that exhibition for export to the United States. Starting January 2016, this exhibition will travel the United States for several years. It will begin in the Jewish Museum in Cleveland, and from there it will travel to Chicago, New York, and other venues. And so traveling exhibitions, again, it's the same principle. We don't expect everybody to physically come to Bet Hatfutzot. We reach out to them wherever they are. And so that's been I suppose, a great change in the way that we see things. Because, again, I'll say this a third time, it's our duty to reach back to the community with the content that we have. And so we're investing a lot of resources and effort into that. Any interesting job is challenging. But I can say the following. One, I've never been more fulfilled in my life. It's as if everything that I've done up till now, and I didn't grow up or mature in the museum industry or in the nonprofit sector or in the Jewish world. Before coming to Bet Hatfutzot, for about 25 years, I was in media. I was in print, and then I was in television. Before coming to Bet Hatfutzot, I ran a television company that produces the local version for the A&E brands, History, Bio, Lifetime. Produces the local version of E! Entertainment and the local version of MGM. So I was a television executive, but I was a media guy for the whole of my life. Now, Bet Hatfutzot isn't all that different from what I did my whole career. I've been in content. This is content. It's just at this time, the content is Jewish identity. For me, it's almost a natural step. It's a huge privilege. I feel that it's in Hebrew we say it's a zchut. It's a privilege. Every moment to serve in this position, I feel lucky. I genuinely feel lucky. One of the beautiful things about Bet Hatfutzot is that although it is not a religious institution at all, in fact, it deals with everything in Jewish identity that's not religious. That is history, heritage, the Hebrew language, values, everything that's not religious. However, it appeals to everybody. And it's a wonderful sight when we open Bet Hatfutzot on Chol HaMoed, on Passover. And we don't charge admission on Chol HaMoed. So the gates are open. And we get thousands of visitors a day on Chol HaMoed. Last Passover, over 3.5 days, we had almost 14,000 people. That's immense. I would say, since it's no admission, you don't have statistics. But looking around, I could tell you that more than 50% were Charedim, were ultra-Orthodox. Why? Because, well, one, the bus from Bnei Brak stops at Bet Hatfutzot. It's a huge deal. Bnei Brak being an ultra-Orthodox town adjacent to Tel Aviv. Secondly, when you've got a family of 8 kids, the fact that there's no admission plays a part, okay? But thirdly, Bet Hatfutzot is a place of Jewish identity for all Jews. Secular, Reform, Conservative, Reconstructionist, Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox, Hasidim, Mitnagdim, you name it. There's nothing at Bet Hatfutzot which would offend anybody. It is genuinely the museum of the Jewish people. It is all-inclusive. And it's a wonderful sight to see side by side, and you can see it by the way they dress. You know who these people are by the way that they dress. You know a secular Jew when you see one, and you see an ultra-Orthodox Jew when you see one. And they're there side by side enjoying the same things at Bet Hatfutzot. It's just a wonderful sight. When I talked about the International School for Jewish People and Studies developing programs, etc., our groups are from kindergarten kids to Army generals. And we get people in every language you can think of. Currently we have programs on a regular basis in Hebrew, English, French, German, Russian, Portuguese, Spanish. And if I know ahead of time, if I get enough notice, we can produce anything in any language. The museum itself is in 2 languages. I mean, there's Hebrew, English, those are the 2 international. But of course, you can get an electronic guide, and you can choose any one of. But the labels themselves will be in 2 languages. Because our mission is to reach anybody, then we need to make ourselves as flexible as possible. I forgot to mention French. There's also French, and so yeah, we don't want that to ever be a barrier, and it isn't. I was saying that we've been working on the new museum since 2008, and it will be 2018 before we're finished. So it'll be more than a decade to redo the museum. Now, going back, we opened in '78, But the person who first thought up of the idea was Nahum Goldman. Nahum Goldman was the head of the World Jewish Congress. He first came up with the idea in 1959, okay? Almost 20 years before we opened. And then it took another 7 years to lay the cornerstone in 1966. And then it took another 12 years to actually open. And the horrifying part is that this is typical. That's the amount of time that it takes for an institution from idea to be a reality. And so if we manage to get the renewal done in 10 years, hey, me and my predecessors did a pretty good job. Now, I have to give credit to a few people. An organization like this doesn't just rise 10 years ago or 8 years ago and reinvents itself. In 2005 or 6, Beit HaTfutzot was in dire straits. It had grave financial difficulties and was on the verge of shutting down. And then we need to thank 3 people for the fact that we are not only still around, but actually reinventing ourselves. One is then Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, who simply decided that Beit HaTfutzot cannot be shut down. The other is Shlomo Lahat, former mayor of Tel Aviv, who passed away less than a year ago. He was then chair of Beit HaTfutzot. He would not let Beit HaTfutzot die. And so he turned to Ariel Sharon, and together they turned to Leonid Nevzlin. Leonid Nevzlin is a Russian-born Israeli philanthropist who made Aliyah in 2003. Ariel Sharon reached out to Leonid Nevzlin and asked him to support Beit HaTfutzot. Natan Sharansky was also very much instrumental in that. And so Leonid Nevzlin said, yes, but I need to know that there's a vision for Beit HaTfutzot. And so he lent his support. But the other thing that happened is that Israeli government passed legislation which ensured the existence of Beit HaTfutzot and ensured that part of our funding that comes from the government, which is about 1/3 of our ongoing budget. So currently, for the past several years, Beit HaTfutzot has been very stable. Our annual budget is balanced. About 1/3 of it comes from the government, 1/3 comes from donations, and 1/3 is self-generated income, which is a healthy division. But I have to emphasize again that if it weren't for these exceptional players, 2 of which are no longer with us, Ariel Sharon and Shlomo Lahat, Beit HaTfutzot would not have been able to pick itself up and have what looks to be a magnificent future. Beit HaTfutzot now, if we picked ourselves up now and went there, it is alive, it's teeming with action, there's something going on all the time. Over 200,000 visitors a year. Do the math, how many we get a day. There's activities all the time. We just finished our summer activity, which was a drumming workshop for families. The place is just alive all the time. So we used to be a must stop for everybody. There's very good reason to stop by again at Beit HaTfutzot. Even more reason in coming months when we launch phase 1 of our renewal program. Leon, thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure.
My name is Shulamith Bahat, and I'm the CEO of Beit HaTfutzot of America, the programmatic arm of Beit HaTfutzot, the Museum of the Jewish People, which is located in Israel. This exhibition is based on an exhibition that we had in Israel about 6 years ago, 6 years ago, which was called Jews of Struggle. And it depicted in a bit of a larger version the struggle of Soviet Jewry and the kind of help Soviet Jewry received from Jews and non-Jews alike during the period 1967-1989, which ended, of course, in Soviet Jews being permitted to live as Jews and to emigrate from the country. When I came to work for Beit HaTfutzot here, I thought that this would be a great exhibit, especially on the occasion of the 25th anniversary of the exodus of Soviet Jews, to have it in the United States. And we began with the Museum of Jewish Heritage as our partners in putting, in a way, a new exhibition together. This exhibit is based on the photographic material of the original exhibit, but there are some artifacts that were already returned to various people. So what you see here is almost like a family album that depicts the struggle of Soviet Jewry, the movement, the people who were involved with it in a sort of a picturesque way, and I believe a very powerful way. There are 1 million Jews who are now, of Russian-speaking Jews who live now in Israel. They have their own culture, their own TV, but their children are already integrated and they have a different culture and a different TV. So what you see, what's so beautiful about Israel is that immigrant groups, the first generation sticks to their own culture and language. And when you walk in the streets of Tel Aviv or Jerusalem, you hear Russian. In the second generation, the young people go to the army where they are socialized into the Israeli society and end up being Israelis like everybody else. As someone who lived in Israel in 1967, whose husband was actually one of the people who freed Jerusalem, his unit came first to the wall and freed the wall. I think that this was an amazing The 6 Days War was an amazing historical event in Jewish life, and clearly brought this pride in being Jewish and being a member of the Jewish people all over the world, including to the Soviet Union, even though the people were not permitted to celebrate their religion or their peoplehood. Nevertheless, they got the news. Without internet, they got the news, and it gave them a great sense of pride. And there are some films actually that depict it. There are photographs that depict it here in this particular exhibit. So that was such an important moment in Jewish life that raised and accelerated the desire to leave the Soviet Union or to remain in the Soviet Union, but live as a Jew, which Jews were not permitted to do.
This exhibition came to us from Beit Hatfutzot in Israel. It was their exhibition which was modified here for an American audience. And having it here has enabled us to work closely with Beit Hatfutzot, which has been a wonderful partnership, and it enables the museum to extend its reach. Having this exhibition here has enabled us to extend our reach to address issues of social justice, to talk about issues other than the Holocaust and about ongoing issues in Jewish life. The Museum of Jewish Heritage is definitely more than a Holocaust museum. We tell the story of the Holocaust within a broader context of Jewish history and talk about life before and after the Holocaust and Jewish renewal, so that this exhibition fits very nicely into our mandate and what we do. One of the things that's affected me most personally about this exhibition is to see the new audiences that it's enabled us to reach. We've done a couple of programs in conjunction with the exhibition, and we've drawn audiences from the Russian Jewish community here in town, which has been really wonderful for us. I think that with this exhibition, as with most museum exhibitions, there are levels of knowledge that are revealed to people as they go through.
Natan Sharansky symbolized for many people the struggle for human rights and for Jewish rights. And his conduct throughout the period was one that inspired people all over the world. His determination to learn Hebrew, to study about Judaism, and to fight, and his willingness to be in jail in spite of it all, he definitely inspired everyone. By the way, for your information, he was the chairman of Beit Hatfutzot when the exhibit first opened. So he certainly had an influence as well. And another important, the Russian connection is very important because the Ministry of Public Diplomacy and Diaspora Affairs, which is headed by Edelstein, who is also a refusnik, a Russian Jew, sponsored this exhibit, helped us really bring this exhibit to the United States. Leon, very much so. He was one of the most important activists during that era. By the way, there are a number of them here, a number of important activists from that era. Leon Charney was very well known and really focused on this struggle. But you have here Steven Greenberg, who was a young man at the time and was very involved with the Soviet Jewry movement. You have Mark Levin, who still had what used to be called the National Council on Soviet Jewry, for Soviet Jewry. It's still called, the acronym is still NCSJ. He was very involved as well. Felix Frankl, who came. So you have people who are very involved in this movement. Actually, they're all standing here. And to me, it's very exciting. It's very exciting that we will bring here young people who know nothing about that era, including Russian-speaking Jews who don't know their own history, and people who were so immersed because the Soviet Jewry movement at a certain point in time, in my opinion, defined world Jewry. It showed that Jews and non-Jews can come together in a way, to follow a very important message, let my people go, Shalach et Ami. It's the message of Exodus. It's a message of freedom that brought people together, inspired people, and there were people who for 20 years dedicated their lives to this particular movement and were successful. Leon Charney was one of the leaders of the movement in the United States. He was an activist at the time, and he, in a way, led a number of Jewish organizations to be part of the movement. You know, in the beginning, there was some reluctance on the part of world Jews and American Jews to be involved in that. They were afraid not so much. They were afraid that the fate of Jews will be affected negatively by that kind of involvement. And I think people like Leon Charney said, no, I mean, we have to stand up. We have to say what we believe in. We have to show that we are responsible for each other. We are responsible for every Jew. And therefore, we are going to be part of this worldwide movement that will, in the end, release Jews from the dictatorship of the former Soviet Union.